On July 1st, 2018, I began my appointment as the 58th pastor of the Franklin United Methodist Church. It has been an absolute pleasure being your pastor for the past 5 years. That being said, it hasn't always been easy. Avery was just 2 weeks old when we moved to Franklin. Our family of six moved into a freshly updated two-bedroom parsonage. While we were immensely grateful for the thoughtful care that went into getting the condo ready for us, it was simply too small. The three older girls shared a bedroom, and Avery slept in the master closet. In the spring of 2019, the decision was made to sell the condo and move to a housing allowance model for providing clergy housing. It is a decision that has allowed Chandra and I to purchase a home in Franklin and begin to dig deep roots in the community. For that, we are immensely grateful. Franklin is very much home to us, and that cannot be understated, given that since having kids, our family has lived in over 5 homes in 3 different states. We are wholly invested in this community. It is our home. We absolutely love it. Over the last 5 years, we made tough decisions to keep the church moving forward as we weathered the COVID-19 pandemic and are now challenged by high inflation and economic downturn. We are in the midst of a massive shift in church culture. People interact and participate in the life of the church in very different ways than they did just a few years ago. Just a few examples. Our average in the sanctuary worship attendance each week is approximately 30 people. This is about 60% of our pre-COVID average weekly worship attendance. However, in addition to our in the sanctuary worshipers, we have additional worshipers in person via Google Meet and dozens more streaming the service via YouTube during the week. In total, our average weekly worship attendance is equivalent to our pre-COVID numbers. It is just spread out across multiple platforms and times. And that doesn't include those who interact with the weekly reflections via social media. We are engaging more people in worship now than we were 5 years ago. We've also seen an increased number of persons financially supporting the church. Our most recent pledge campaign saw the highest number of pledging units in recent history and our second highest amount pledged in recent history. The major shift that has occurred is that unlike years past when pledges were received weekly, most of our current pledgers give less frequently and most often annual. Nonetheless, they contribute faithfully. Every generation has its challenges. It is important to note that while the challenges we face are unique to our time, the fact that we are a generation faced with challenges is nothing new. In the 180 years of Methodism in Franklin, our spiritual forebears have had to deal with declining participation, reneged plans to purchase a building, foreclosure, the flu epidemic, the Great Depression, multiple world wars, a transition from full-time to part-time and back to full-time clergy. It has been dragged into a heresy trial and had to deal with the varied gifts, skills, and quirks of over 50 clergy persons, including myself. Every generation has its challenges. And yet every generation is called, in the words of the psalmist, to extol God's works to another and declare God's mighty acts. Every generation, in spite of its challenges, is called to share about God's steadfast love and mercy with the next generation. As such, in the words of Reverend Robert Durkee, the 41st pastor of the Franklin Methodists, every generation is the heir to those who have gone on before them. And so too, every generation in some way determines the lives of those who come after them. Like a falling domino train, each generation impacts the next, hopefully propelling it forward and empowering it to move the next generation too. We are the fruit of our forebears and the seed of future generations. I want to say that again. We, you and I, we are the fruit of our forebears and the seed of future generations. The Pew Research Center defines a generation as typically a group of people born between a 15 to 20-year time span who have all lived through similar events in history and popular culture. Over the last 3 years, we have gone through a pandemic, which has forced us to adapt in ways we knew were going to have to happen, but we're hoping to stave off for as long as possible. We have seen massive shifts in popular culture and the church, which I believe will define not only a new generation, broadly speaking, but also a new generation of Christians. Our reality is increasingly hybrid. This is a massive shift that I don't think is going to go away, especially here in the church. The hybrid environment allows an equity of participation that the church has never experienced before, allowing those who otherwise cannot physically come to a building to actively participate with those who are physically in the room. Our reality is largely on demand. Our schedules are sporadic. We get to things when we can. In the church, this has led to fewer weekly participants, but more on-demand participation through social media and streaming platforms. This will mean that our gatherings will most likely remain relatively small, but reach farther than ever before. Our reality is less geographically centered. Our hybrid and on-demand realities mean that we are less anchored to specific places. But that doesn't mean that place is irrelevant. Buildings still matter. However, the role they now play is different. Church buildings are no longer simply places where Christians gather for worship and Sunday school. They are backdrops, quite literally and metaphorically, for a larger narrative of God's outreaching love to the community and world. They function as a hub of community outreach and service, providing a place, both physical and virtual, for people to connect with one another, and even if in an indirect way, connect with God. Our reality has changed dramatically over the last few years. But this one thing remains. People yearn for connection. Human beings find life in and through community. This has been true from the beginning and will be true long after you and I are gone. We human beings find meaning through our relationships. The church is called to be a place where life-giving relationships are forged and fostered. I think our vision statement, adopted in October of 2021, speaks quite eloquently about our need to foster this type of relationship, not only with God, but also with one another. It states, "We seek to be a community where all can experience meaningful relationship with God, grow in Christ, and reach out in love to others. A community where all can love and be loved. A community where you are accepted as you are." It is with this vision that we are propelled forward as we seek to expand our witness in the community and share the love of God found in Jesus Christ. The question we need to ask is, does our facility as it is right now, help us live into our vision. In May of 2022, the Resource Committee did a thorough walkthrough of the building. We opened every closet, went in every space in the facility, and started listing what we saw based on the way the building was being used. The notes from that walkthrough can be found on the church website. In short, the building needs a lot of work and creates several challenges. The roof needs to be replaced, and the exterior of the building is decaying rapidly. The balcony and the basement are underutilized spaces due to accessibility constraints. The HVAC system does not condition air, nor does it circulate fresh air through the entirety of the building. The kitchen, vestry, and bathrooms need to be updated. In addition to these facility needs, there are few designated legacy funds for perpetual funding of ministry and capital improvements. In other words, we do not sit on a large endowment to help pay for all or any of these capital improvements. Now, I want to pause for just one moment and say that dealing with delayed maintenance and capital improvements has been a challenge of every generation of Franklin Methodists. Painting with some very broad brushstrokes, and for those of you that maybe have been connected to the church for any amount of time or a part of the broader Franklin community for any amount of time, you may notice that I'm leaving a few things out. That's intentional. Our history is long and there's no way to recount everything, but painting with some very broad brushstrokes, I want to outline some of the major capital improvements that have happened in the past. It all began in the early 1870s when land was purchased and the building constructed. What's amazing about the construction of our facility is land was purchased in June of 1872, and by June of the following year, the building was dedicated to the work of God. In the early 1900s, the stained glass windows and the pipe organ behind me were installed. In the early 1930s, an addition was added to the building, which included kitchen and classrooms, which we currently use as offices. In the 1950s, there was a major capital campaign to renovate the basement of the church, to put new flooring in the sanctuary, new pew cushions in. They also painted the interior and exterior of the building, among many other projects. The reason I lift up this particular campaign is that it is incredibly notable that as part of this campaign, all the repairs were paid for in cash. In the mid-1980s, major repairs were made to the organ and the building's exterior, among other projects. In the 1990s, there was another major renovation of the basement. The roof was replaced, the stained glass windows were restored, exterior walls were stabilized, and a handicap ramp and accessible restroom were put in. In the mid-2000s, the sanctuary was renovated, including new pews and lighting. It was also during this time that the cell tower was installed in the bell tower and balcony of the church. Broadly speaking, no major infrastructure work has happened on the building in 30 years, and no major work has been done inside the building in 20 years. In essence, most of the areas renovated and restored during the last 3 capital campaigns need to be revisited. It's worth noting that they need to be revisited not because the work was done poorly, but because it's simply time to do it all again. With the scope of work being so large, the Resource Committee recommended to the Church Council that we hire an architect to think through some of the major challenges of our facility, namely accessibility across all levels of the building, bathrooms, and better utilization of the balcony and basement. The goal was to come up with a design that could guide our work as we began to address the delayed maintenance issues of our building. The idea being that as we repaired the delayed maintenance issues, we wouldn't get ourselves in any trouble and have to potentially take out work that we've just done as we move toward a more accessible building and better utilized space in the future. The preliminary facility design for each level can be found on the church website. Our facility does need work. It needs restoration work, and it needs to be renovated so that it is more accessible. I truly believe that our commitment to addressing the many needs of our facility will not only define our generation, it will also impact the many generations of Franklin Methodists yet to be. So how can we begin to address our facility needs? The projected total cost of completing all the renovations and restorations is approximately $1.7 million. Now, the good news is that some work has already been done. We have an initial architectural design. We also have a new high-efficiency boiler. We also have several projects in progress. We have a small legacy endowment that was established in 1992. It has a balance of roughly $31,500. The roof is going to be replaced and paid for through an insurance claim. And we have estimates coming in for the restoration of the sanctuary ceiling. There are several decisions yet to be made regarding the ceiling and roof projects. Two major questions being, will we restore the dormers or take the remaining ones out? And will we add stenciling to the ceiling? It is something that most people who are currently alive have never seen before, but is an homage to the detail that once existed in the sanctuary. Will we do that, add the stenciling, or will we simply just paint the ceiling white as it is today? The good news is that funding for these two projects has been mostly secured. Some things have already been done, and other things are in progress. In order to address the remaining issues of our facility, we will need to raise about $1.5 million. Now is our time to rise to the challenge of our day. Now is our opportunity to honor the sacrifices of our spiritual forebears by rededicating ourselves to the cause so that our facility might continue to be a place where new generations can learn to love God, love their neighbor, and be the church. There are a couple of next steps that I want to make you aware of. The first is that the church has contracted with Horizon's stewardship. We have secured the counsel of Tom Melzoni. Tom is the senior vice president of Horizon's stewardship. He'll be conducting a feasibility study. The study will happen the first part of June 2023. That study will include interviews and a survey meant to go out to everyone. If you would like to be interviewed by Tom, it's a 30-minute interview. It'll happen via Zoom or via the phone. And those interviews are completely confidential. Actually, the surveys are too. Both the survey and the interviews do not happen with me in the room or any other leadership person in the church having access to the information. So it's a great opportunity for you to reflect with Tom what you think about this presentation, what your hopes are for the church, and what your concerns are as we continue to discern whether or not we are up to the challenge of meeting the needs of our facility as it stands today for the sake of the future. The second thing that I want to make sure we're all really clear on, and this is, quite frankly, the most important step. Regardless of how we feel, regardless of whether or not we agree with all of the projects listed in the packet and what needs to be done, the most important thing that we need to do is be the church. we need to grow ever more in love with God. We need to be reaching out farther and farther to our neighbors. We need to be sharing the love of God found in Jesus Christ with the new generation. As we devote ourselves to those things, I truly believe that we may just find the work before us to be way, way more achievable than we ever thought imaginable. Thanks for taking some time to listen to this presentation. If you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out to me via email. My email address is jacob@franklinumc.org.